This week we'll be talking about Adam Ondra's surprise trip to Sheffield and the Peak District, Callum Muskett and Dave MacLeod's Scottish winter repeat of Greg Boswell's Banana Wall, grade 12, and Michaela Kiersch making the third female ascent of La Rambla, the 9A+, in Siurana, Spain. When the news first broke of Adam Ondra's surprise trip to the UK, there was a lot of speculation about what he'd be getting on and where he'd be going. Obviously there was the unfinished business of Hubble, 9A at Raventor, but where he actually ended up was somewhere completely different. And the first glimpse we got of him was courtesy of the Wide Boys, Tom Randall and Pete Whitaker, stood underneath an exceptionally green looking raised roof over in the Western Peak District. Now we don't know the result of that battle yet, or a lot of information on this trip. However, what's pretty clear is that the Wide Boys, Adam Ondra, and none other than Magnus 1 million followers Mitbo were over content creating. Green cracks potentially set the scene for the rest of the trip, which rather than being at the absolute cutting edge, felt like it was more of a historical tour through some classic landmarks in British climbing, depending on your definition of landmark, including the likes of Tom Randall's cellar, aka the Crack Den, where they proceeded to try established problems set by the likes of Tom and Pete. More on that later, no doubt courtesy of the Wide Boys YouTube channel. The next few places they went were pretty random, including the Broomgrove Wall. This infamous man-made structure has been used throughout the generations to traverse back and forth in order to gain fitness. And that was perhaps the most unlikely place you would have ever expected to see the man who is largely considered to be the greatest of all time. But he goes further up in my estimations for having done so. However, lovely though visiting these slightly random and, dare I say it, relatively obscure places was, the crowning jewel of Adam's trip to Sheffield and the Peak District was his trip to Stanage Plantation. The ascent that's got everyone talking is his flash of Jerry Moffat's problem, the Ace, with Jerry there spotting him. This is, as far as we know, the first time that a Gritstone Font 8B has been flashed, which is an impressive effort for this notoriously fickle medium. According to 8a.nu, Adam described it as a freak moment executed just perfectly. He also went on to repeat Careless Talk, Ron Fawcett's classic Font 8a from the 1980s. This line took him a little more time, supposedly taking somewhere between 4 to 6 goes, according to eyewitness reports, which isn't a lot more goes. It's still very impressive, and potentially one of the quickest to date too. Unfortunately, Hubble at Raventor remains unfinished business. However, we hope he'll be back to complete the route and try a load of other cool stuff, and not just climb underneath some man-made bridges. Further north, with a completely different medium of climbing, Callum Muskett and Dave MacLeod have repeated Greg Boswell's grade 12-12 in Corrian Lochan in the northern Cairngorms. Greg Boswell made the first ascent of Banana Wall in 2015, when it became the second grade 12 after Dave MacLeod's Anubis over on Ben Nevis. It subsequently remained unrepeated until a few weeks ago when Callum and Dave went in for a look. During these early attempts, they were thwarted initially by confusion about where the route actually went, particularly within the lower section, the iced up nature of the cracks, which made that protecting the route was quite hard, and finally, the fact that the route itself is really hard due to its steep and sustained nature. We contacted Callum about the style of the ascent, and he had this to say. Both of us had gear in from our previous attempts, so it was more like an M10 for the actual ascent. We went ground up on the route initially, but due to icy conditions, ended up dogging the pitch on our second visit, so we could actually get Peckers and Terriers in for pro, as the cracks were too icy for anything else, with Dave doing the hard shift and going first. For those who don't know, Peckers and Terriers are really small, marginal pieces of equipment, kind of like a micro ice axe. It's not bomber. The route still hasn't had a clean lead, placing all the kit on lead, although it sounded like Greg got fairly close when he did the FA, falling near the top, then let it next go with the kit in place. Greg did abseil inspect the upper part of the route before making the first ascent, placing gear to hold him in on the abseil down. So I guess our ascent was a slight progression from that style, although it's obviously easier for a second ascent. And the next logical step would be a cleaner, ground up style. I think in drier, rhymed conditions, when you can place cams, I could place gear on lead on my next attempt. But obviously a lot different knowing where the hooks and kit are. And to be honest, It would just feel like doing it for an improvement in style for a news report, rather than being personally more rewarding or challenging. Callum Dave's ascent has added to what has already become an incredible Scottish winter season, particularly at the top level, with ascents such as Greg Boswell's Bring the Ruckus, the first ever grade 12 Tech 13 in Scottish winter climbing. American climber Michaela Kiersch has made the third female ascent of La Rambla, the 9A+ in Siurana, Spain. In doing so, she's become the 10th woman to climb 9A+ and above, and the second only to Ashima to have climbed both a 9A+ in sport and a Font 8B+ boulder problem. Margot Hayes made the first female ascent of La Rambla back in 2017, and then late last year, Cheon Seo from Korea made the second female ascent. Hopefully we see more first female ascents coming this year, knocking on the doors of 9B and 9B+.